Am I the asshole for correcting a Christian? One of my M37 oldest friends, F36, had a new boyfriend. He seems like a decent guy, even loaned my $20 for lunch once. Yes, I paid it back. He is, however, quite religious, while the rest of our friend group is not. He is not overbearing about it, but he does refer to his faith and Christ an awful lot, just on the edge of what would be irritating. My friend has told us he doesn't mean anything by it, but that's just how he was raised and he doesn't think it's abnormal, so we cut him some slack. We were having drinks one evening and talking about Roman history, as one does. Of note, I am a historian, with my doctorate from a top university. But I don't work in the field of history, so it rarely comes up and I don't make a big deal about it. The conversation turned to sources of ancient Roman history and how a lot of the things we think we know are due to the biases of the classical historians, or them just transcribing oral traditions. Our new friend spoke up and stated that at least we could trust the Gospels because they were written by eyewitnesses, the disciples of Jesus. Notably, we had not been talking about Christianity in particular. I corrected him, that none of the Gospels were written by disciples, but by unnamed others long afterwards. I did so in what I thought was an entirely civil and conversational tone. He immediately got very angry and loudly told us there was no one here who knew the Bible better than him and that he knew for a fact the 4 Gospels were written by the 4 disciples of the same name. He then dared me to prove him wrong. So I gave him the scriptural evidence, which is pretty absolute. I'm not going to get into the specific evidence here because I do not want this thread to turn into a polemic for or against the Bible, or whatever. If people really care, I can put it in the comments. Suffice to say the evidence is pretty incontrovertible, and out of the scripture itself. I laid it out as politely and briefly as I could, and then, and here is where I probably drifted into asshole territory. I just mentioned that, since nobody knows the scripture better than him, I'm surprised he didn't know this already. Anyway, he lost his poop, was screaming at me inches from my face about how I was a communist, and an anti-Christian, again, not, and how he is always prosecuted no matter where he goes, and threw in a number of choice swear words and insults along the way. Then he stormed out screaming, got into his car, leaned on the horn for about 30 seconds, then drove away. The clear consensus among my friends was that he was certainly an asshole for his reaction, but the group was split as to whether I was also an asshole for having corrected him on a topic clearly so close to his heart. So, I throw myself open and ready for judgment from the collective wisdom, or at least collected comment section, of Reddit. Was I the asshole for correcting, and then demonstrating his wrongness, in front of the group? Edit to add. I should be clear, my doctorate in history is not actually in the history of the Bible or early Christian theology, nor did I at any point mention my credentials. Edit 2. Since I have been asked, the lead into the conversation wasn't religion at all, but one of the group had just rewatched Gladiator on Netflix. Not the asshole, but there's something seriously wrong with that guy. His reaction was crazed and scary. I'm not a Christian or a historian, and I knew the Gospels weren't written by 4 dudes named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't think that's arcane knowledge. People have been dissecting it for centuries. He's not very secure in his faith if this conversation made his head explode like that. Maybe it's good that your friend got a look at his bizarreness over religion. Maybe she's forewarned now. Not the asshole. Is this person okay? More importantly, is your friend okay? That was an extremely extreme reaction. Not the asshole. At all. If you're going to brag about much you know about a subject, you'd better be able to back it up without resorting to childish tantrums. Truth hurts sometimes. Not the asshole. He tried to speak historical untruths, and you know your field better than he does. He demanded evidence, and you provided. Sure, you didn't have to rub salt in the wound, but he's a prime example of Christians refusing to face the evidence before them, and being upset when anyone challenges them. If he was just upset and had reacted calmly, that would have been one thing, and maybe contrition would have been easier to come by for you. But after a display like that? I'd honestly be afraid for the friend dating him. He clearly can't handle being wrong. Not the asshole typical religious BS. Can't back up their claims, and lose their minds when called out, revealing how un-Christian they really are. Not the asshole. And, dude. If anyone needs a little religion in their life, it is that guy because he clearly lost it. Not the asshole. I probably wouldn't have made a dig about him not knowing it already, but to be honest, if he's going to go out on a limb and claim no one knows scripture better than him, he'd better be prepared. What really annoys me is that he seems to equate absolute faith with ignorance. Questioning scripture and where it came from is not necessarily anti-Christian. The first no Christians who explore their faith in this very way. He is an asshole for sure, and way out of line. Not the asshole. Many believers have never actually read the Bible cover to cover. So if he's so sure of himself, a debate shouldn't make him react like that. Plus it wasn't even a debate, more like a disagreement on one point. Not the asshole. I would say that your last line would put you close to being the asshole just because it perceived some intention of making him look dumb in front of everyone. Even though he did that to himself and you didn't intend on humiliating him. Ultimately, his reaction was unwarranted and he needed to be open to the fact he could be mistaken. However, I am curious because I am a Christian and I always had the notion that some of the disciples did write some of the books in the Bible like Paul and Peter. Though I am aware that their writing could have been through all sorts of translating and rewriting over the years. Not the asshole. His reaction was completely over the top and not very Christian-like. What's that phrase about turning the other cheek? He was talking out of his $@ and was proven wrong. He was the one who interjected with a false statement. It can suck to be corrected in something you believe is true, but his reaction to you politely correcting him is all you need to know what kind of person he truly is, and love when religious people get proven wrong with something from the book they supposedly know by heart or are shown the contradictions within it and get angry at you for it. You didn't write it. The disciples did according to that guy. Not the asshole. His behavior is a bit much, he sounds really unhinged. Not the asshole. He made a factually wrong statement and you corrected the facts. Not the asshole. If he's not open to having his faith tested, then he shouldn't be bringing it up in unrelated conversations, especially when it contradicts someone's area of expertise. It doesn't sound like you were being particularly rude or trying to make him look stupid, although that last comment was pretty condescending. You're better off not being friends with someone who can't take well-intentioned correction or criticism. Not the asshole. You were not malicious, just wanting to tell the truth. Not the asshole. Both of you put forth what you believe to be fact. He went mental. Not the asshole. And frankly, you are my hero. Tears of joy. Tears of joy. I am quite interested in the evidence though, and I'm wondering where I could perhaps find it. Not the asshole. He lost any standing to be considered reasonable when he began to state absolutely that he knew the Bible more than anyone and that the Bible was correct, and when he blew up when presented with evidence. He could have simply asked to end the conversation or said that he respectfully disagreed. He completely lost any right to be considered reasonable when he pulled out the line about Christians being persecuted in the US and started screaming. You were in a polite debate and he became unhinged. Again, if he were offended, he should have simply asked to end the conversation. Not the asshole. The Bible itself got you covered there, to be honest. Galatians chapter 4 verse 16. Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Tell your friend to unchap their ass and look into things more. Not the asshole. He is what's wrong with Christianity. The Christians. I'm a believer but not blindly. Not the asshole. That was a really basic fact that he had wrong. No harm in correcting him, and there was no way to know he would freak out either. Reminds me of a conversation I had with coworker. This was over 20 years ago. It somehow came up that he thought the Earth was the center of the solar system. He was 18 and I was a few years older. I politely explained that, in fact, the sun was at the center. He was genuinely surprised and actually thankful that I informed him of this. Well, he sounds like a whole lot of fun. Sarcasm. Not the asshole. And if he remains part of the group, I would distance myself until he gets inches away from someone else's face and screams at them for some other horrible blasphemy. Because, you know he will. Not the asshole. He definitely doesn't know how to discuss politically. Yes, please put it in the comments. Not the asshole. Most Christians don't know their Bible nearly as well as they think they do. Most atheists know the Bible better than the average Christian. Nothing blocks the average Bible dispute better than a chapter and verse reference which they have to look up for themselves. Next time he spouts off, just say, Matthew chapter 6 verse 5, and let him look it up for himself. I have a guilty pleasure of unmasking malignant narcissists. It is amazing to watch these people melt and show their true colors when all you have to do is be gently honest. Sounds like you did a good job. Not the asshole. Not the asshole. As they say, the truth hurts. You obviously wounded his pride. Isn't that a sin? And his reactions show he was wrong and knows it by his outburst. Unless you had ulterior motives, then this is all on him. Not the asshole. How does a good Christian not know that the Gospels were written later? I seem to recall the closest thing to a gospel written at the time was the Gospel of Thomas, and that's not included in the Bible. I am a Catholic, so I can understand how some people can get a bit defensive about religion, but this wasn't even a religious argument. You were correcting him about who wrote the book, not what was in it. 100% not the asshole. After he left, I would have broken the awkward silence with, "Are you not entertained?" Not the asshole. Seems like that person could not handle being wrong about what they base their faith on. NTA. He lashed out because you called him out on something he was wrong about, and he was probably embarrassed that he couldn't counter what you said. If he wants to constantly bring up his religion to people, then he needs to be prepared for people to ask questions, and he can't get upset when he's wrong about something. I would be interested to know how we know the 4 Gospels weren't written by the disciples. I'm an atheist myself, been raised religious, but I didn't know there was this evidence. Could you sum it up for me? Not the asshole, by the way. Not the asshole. I study theology and religion, and it's pretty common knowledge that the canonical Gospels weren't written by the disciples and were written many years after Jesus' death. Plus there's theory that Mark's was written first, with Matthew and Luke rewording certain parts of Mark's with their own emphasis included. So for Matthew it was law and Luke it was poverty. Op isn't an asshole for correcting someone on history. Not the asshole. I took a theology course in uni. The professor told us half the class would drop out of it, so he gave us a quick run-through of the controversial things that would come up. This was one of the topics. Sure enough, a bunch of people, the ones who tried to argue with him about it, didn't come back to the class after. Not the asshole, of course, for saying something true. He's ignorant and deluded, and obviously went highly aggressive the moment he was corrected. If you start spouting stuff with that kind of certainty, one day you're inevitably going to come up against somebody who will correct you. Being corrected by somebody that knows more should be welcomed if you're genuinely interested in knowledge. Not the asshole. You're entitled to your own opinions but not your own facts. You've already, correctly, agreed with your friends that he's the asshole for his reaction. So remove that from the situation to see if you're the asshole too. The way that conversation should have gone was, "Hey, that's not actually true, and here's some interesting historical evidence to back me up." Him, "Wow, that's interesting, thanks for teaching me." Without his explosion, there is literally nothing in that interaction that could even make you look a little bit like an awe. So, not the asshole. At all. Not the asshole, but maybe the asshole for not sharing that evidence. Just kidding. I'm probably under a rock a bit here, but I'd love to know more about the scriptural evidence you mentioned. I grew up in a church, left a few years ago, but I love finding out bits I didn't know about. Not the asshole. You are educated on the topic and was sharing your knowledge. Your comment was indeed on the awry side, but very okay considering his attitude. Way too many religious people believe blindly and will have an issue with scholarly discussions, opinions. I was glad to see in the comments he's already out of the picture. These people suck. Not the asshole, but I'd like to know what his girlfriend's reaction to his outburst was. And has she contacted you since? And how he is always prosecuted no matter where he goes. I want to know why people are always bringing legal action against him. Not the asshole, but this is why it's best to stay away from religion and politics in casual social settings. I know, he brought it up. Just saying, this particular convention is rooted in solid observation of human behavior. As a side note, it's always amusing when hyper-religious people lose their religion, so to speak. It makes me think they've been trying all along to convince themselves. Not the asshole. It's surprising how little many Christians know about the Bible. What you told him isn't some fringe theory, it's pretty much universally accepted. But more importantly, his reaction was completely overboard. Obviously, no one likes to have their core beliefs threatened, whether they're religious, political, or anything else, but that's no excuse to flip out like that. Ah yes, Christians, the most persecuted and marginalized of religions, expressionless wants to be a martyr like Jesus, I guess. Not the asshole. This dude needs to chill the fuck out. Persecuted. Don't know if you were writing what you said, but it's quite an important difference. But no, you weren't. This is a great example of a little knowledge being a dangerous thing. It's widely known to anyone with a semi-decent Western education that Bible scholars, Christian or otherwise, understand that the Gospels were not written during the disciples' lifetimes, though they draw on written sources that do date from that time. Not the asshole. I mean Christian scholars don't accept, for the most part, that they were written by the apostles, the earliest one being Mark 1 think, as soon as like 60 years after the death of Christ. That and he literally asked for it. Not the asshole. Also, who cares if you're anti-Christian or anti-any religion? I'm tired of pretending that believing in Santa Claus as an adult is acceptable. Do better, humanity. Not the asshole sounds like he's an evangelical Christian, who often consider the Bible to be the literal truth. Not all Christians believe this. His reaction is an extreme form of cognitive dissonance. When people are confronted with information that contradicts their worldview, there can be an aggressive reaction. I don't think you were an asshole in this situation as long as you weren't taunting him about it. I have the feeling this is going to be one of those close votes with approximately equal numbers saying, yes, and, no, not the asshole. Your Extian acquaintance stated publicly that, nobody knew the Bible better than him, and then, dared you to prove him wrong. He asked to be publicly corrected, so correcting him publicly was acceptable. It was mildly childish, retaliatory to call him out for his ignorance afterward, but any subject matter expert is likely to do the same when called out in their area of expertise by a dilettante. Religious people are almost exclusively dilettantes about their religion. They know what they know, and never look deeper than what they have been told about the religion by a trusted authority, who is often as much a dilettante as they are. Not the asshole, until the, "I'm surprised you don't know this" comment. It's probably what pushed him over the edge. You corrected him with facts from his own source. And his absolute denial that you couldn't possibly be right because you're not Christian enough isn't very Christianly of him. Why should he be allowed to bring up topics that no one else was talking about, but you're not allowed to speak up when they say something false about that topic? He gets proven wrong, calls you a communist, and storms out? He sounds like a good guy.